I'm going to talk about utilitarianism, the other main school of humanist moral philosophy, and I'm going to devote more words to that than to libertarianism because it's so important in economics. Utilitarianism goes back to Jeremy Bentham, who you see pictured here. And there's three elements to this. One is that utility equals pleasure and happiness. Something is good if it gives us pleasure. Second element is that government should strive for the greatest good for the greatest number. And Bentham was a radical. At that time England was run for the benefit of rich white men, and Bentham argued that no, the government should be run for the benefit of all white men, including poor men. Not quite. Bentham wasn't so keen on Catholics, so really he argued that the government should be run for the benefit of all white Protestant men. Now we would have something to say about that at this time. He would be seen as quite a reactionary, but at that time he was a left-wing radical. So that's the second element, and the third element is that it doesn't matter how you get there. What matters is where you end up. And in that sense, utilitarianism is the exact opposite of libertarianism. Libertarianism is all about process. What matters is how you get there, not where you end up. Utilitarianism is all about the outcome, and it doesn't matter how you got there. Utilitarianism would justify a benevolent strongman, for instance. There's just no concept of procedural justice. Now, there are narrow definitions of narrow approaches to utilitarianism, where utility is my pleasure and the moral agent is a human, and welfare is the simple sum of utilities. But there's also broader versions of utilitarianism where it includes altruism, that people can care about other people. You can easily extend it to non-human animals, and you can generalize welfare to some function of utilities. Pareto introduced superiority and optimality, and it's very hard to disagree with his definition of Pareto superiority, namely that a situation A is better than situation B. At least one person is better off and no one is worse off. You need to be fairly strange to object to that. And then a Pareto is said to be Pareto, a situation is said to be Pareto optimal if there are no Pareto improvements possible. And besides Pareto optimality, we also call that efficiency in economics, which is a very silly term of economics jargon. Pareto optimality and Pareto superiority are quite impractical. So Kaldor and Higgs, who you also see displayed here, introduced potential Pareto improvements, where a situation A is better than a situation B if the sum total has increased, so that the winners can compensate the losers, and after that compensation the losers are no longer worse off, but the winners still have enough surplus so that they are better off. This is also referred to as the Kaldor-Higgs criterion, another piece of impenetrable jargon. We have the two fundamental welfare theorems. A perfectly competitive equilibrium is a Pareto optimum, is efficient. That's the first fundamental welfare theorem, and that of course goes back to Adam Smith, who sort of waved his hands at this. And then we have the second fundamental welfare theorem that says that any Pareto optimum, can be achieved as a perfectly competitive equilibrium with the appropriate reallocation of resources. So these two fundamental welfare theorems were first sort of shown graphically by Abba Lerner. You see here the first mathematical proof was Harold Hotelling, but we currently know them in the form as derived by Lange and Taylor. So essentially what these welfare theorem says, that a perfect market goes to a Pareto optimum, and then but that is conditional. The market allocation is conditional on the initial allocation of resources, but then by reallocating those resources you can reach a different Pareto optimum. And it's, as I said, it's hard to argue against Pareto optimality, but essentially what you have here is that through the redistribution you can reach an infinite number of Pareto optima. And then the question is, which of those Pareto optimums or optima is the best one? For that we need a welfare function. What you can do is just write up a general function where you say that utility is some function of things that matter to us, right? X can be anything, and then welfare is some function of individual utilities. So this is for person I, and this is for society, and this is known as the Bergson-Samuelson utility function. It's just a function, but not very helpful. So Atkinson says, let's look at the generalized summation, where you raise the individual utility to the power 1 minus gamma, and then for sanity's sake you divide the whole thing by 1 minus gamma. Still, this is a very general function, so what you can do is set gamma to equal to 0, and then you say, well, happiness of a society is the sum total of the happiness of everybody in that society, and that is what Bentham suggested. You can let gamma go to infinity, and then essentially you say that the happiness of society is equal to the happiness of the person who is worst off in that society, and John Rawls may have supported that. You can set gamma equal to 1 and apply L'Hopital's rule, and then you would find that the welfare of society is the sum of the utilities of everybody in that society. John Nash suggested that in recent times, and Bernoulli much earlier, and you can also let gamma go to minus infinity, and then well-being of society is equal to the person who is best off, and Nietzsche may have argued for this. Now, all good and well, but there is of course also Arrow's impossibility theorem. And Arrow showed, and you see him depicted here, if you have an economy with 2 agents and 3 goods, or an economy with 3 agents and 2 goods, and we don't know how to compare utility. I know how happy I am, you know how happy you are, but there's no way that we can say that I am happier than you, or vice versa. So if we meet those criteria, then individual preferences, and individual preferences can be, of course, be expressed as utility functions, cannot be aggregated to social preferences or a social welfare function if that social welfare function has to satisfy the criteria that you see here, that it is non-dictatorship, nobody is the boss, there's non-imposition, I cannot impose my values on you, there's unrestricted domain, that is, it applies to everything. Everything that's possible. It's independent of irrelevant alternatives, that is, our ranking of A and B does not change whether or not C is available. If we prefer A to B if C is not there, then we prefer A to B if C is there. And also that social welfare function needs to be monotone, that is, if I start appreciating something more, then society should not start appreciating that something less. If those axioms are met, then Arrow showed there cannot be a social welfare function. It is impossible to aggregate individual preferences to social preferences, which leaves us in quite a bind, right? We know that there is a continuum of Pareto optima, and we need a social welfare function to choose from them, but we cannot have a social welfare function. It cannot exist.